What if consciousness isn't just neurons firing, but quantum events happening deep inside your brain? Well, at least that's the claim behind one of the most controversial theories in neuroscience. And it is backed by physicists and an anesthesiologist. It is called the Orch OR theory, and it could reshape how we think about our brains, matter, and AI. So stick around, because this theory might sound wild, but it has stuck around. Hi there, I'm Yvette, a neuroscientist and an author of several neuroscience studies. On this channel, I go beyond the scientific facts. I break down how the brain works, decode its mysteries, and explore the deeper questions that they raise about who we are, what we believe, and how science will shape our future. So if you feel that your curiosity never quite fit in, who knows, maybe you just found your space. So let's start with a simple yet unsolved question, and that is, why do we experience anything at all? Science can map the electrical signals in your brain and tell you which areas light up when you see a cat or taste chocolate, but that doesn't explain why those signals turn into an actual experience, the feeling of seeing, the sound of your own thoughts. And this is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Because why does any of this brain activity come with a personal inner world? Most scientists believe that consciousness just emerges from complex computations in the brain. But so far, nobody has shown how and why this happens. And this uncertainty has left the door wide open for some wild theories. One of the boldest theories comes from two unlikely collaborators. Sir Roger Penrose, who is a world-renowned mathematician and physicist, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who is fascinated by the mysteries of the mind. Their theory is called Orchestrated Objective Reduction, or OrchOR for short. So what does that mean? Because for sure they use some weird words there. So here's the idea in a nutshell. Penrose proposed that consciousness isn't just the product of regular brain activity, but it is due to special quantum events. In quantum physics, particles can exist in multiple states at once, a phenomenon which is called superposition. But you probably have heard of it by this famous illustration of Schrödinger's cat. That a cat, which when trapped in a box with a radioactive substance, it has a 50-50 chance of survival. And due to this probability, before one lifts the lid of the box and checks what's inside, the cat could be either alive or die. At this scale, reality is a cloud of probabilities, not certainties, and it will settle for a particular state only when observed or measured. And Penrose thought that only something as strange as this can explain the weirdness of consciousness. So then Hameroff came along, and he suggested that the place where these quantum events might be taking place is happening deep inside your neurons in tiny structures called microtubules. Microtubules are like scaffolding inside neurons, helping cells keep their shape and also organize the traffic inside. But Hameroff argued that these microtubules are doing something more, because he suggested that they might be supporting delicate quantum processes. Together, Penrose and Hameroff proposed that when enough of these quantum events collapse, meaning that they resolve from a cloud of possibilities to one reality, they would be generating a moment of conscious experience. And if you orchestrate, so to use their words, these events across billions of microtubules, you get a stream of consciousness. In this scenario, consciousness, according to the OrchOR theory, is not just computation, but it is the quantum orchestration inside your brain cells. So why does the OrchOR theory insist on quantum physics and not just stick to the good old neurons and synapses? And the answer comes from Penrose's background in mathematics. He argued that regular classical computation, even with billions of neurons, can never fully explain the weird subjective feeling of consciousness. He pointed to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, a famous set of results in maths where it says that some truths cannot be captured by a set of rules or algorithms. In other words, there are limits to what classical computation can do. And in this case, 1 plus 1 is not always equal to 2. Penrose believed that our minds routinely do things that no algorithm could, like understanding abstract meaning or recognizing entirely new patterns. So, to solve this, he turned to quantum physics, the one area of science where reality doesn't seem to be fully algorithmic. The OrchOR theory claims that when a quantum state in a microtubule reaches a threshold, it collapses objectively by the laws of physics. And it is right in this moment that a conscious experience arises. If this sounds like almost mystical, you're definitely not alone. But Penrose and Hameroff argued that only something this radical can explain consciousness, can bridge this gap between mere computation and the inner light of conscious awareness. In a way, OrchOR theory is saying that in order to explain the mysteries of the mind, we might need to tap into the weirdest mysteries of the universe itself. Now, if you're thinking that this all sounds a little bit too wild, you're definitely not alone. OrchOR theory is one of the most controversial theories in neuroscience and in physics. As you can imagine, it's for good reason. Most neuroscientists argue that the brain is way too warm, wet and noisy for these delicate quantum events to happen. In quantum physics, the environment tends to destroy these fragile quantum states almost instantly, which is a process called decoherence. One of the best known critiques comes from the physicist Max Tegmark, who calculated that any quantum superposition in the brain would collapse in less than a trillionth of a second, which is far too fast to play a meaningful role in consciousness. In short, by the time that a quantum effect could matter, it has already been wiped out by the brain's biological noise. Skeptics also point out that there is no direct experimental evidence that quantum events are happening in microtubules, or for Penrose's specific quantum collapse. But Penrose and Hameroff aren't backing down. They argue that maybe microtubules have special properties to protect these quantum states, or that they simply haven't looked closely enough. They point to hints of quantum effects in biology, like how some birds navigate using some quantum processes, or how photosynthesis can use quantum coherence. So is OrchOR a revolutionary insight, or just a beautiful idea that is searching for evidence? Well, the debate is very much alive. So, has the OrchOR theory actually influenced real-life science and technology? And surprisingly, it is yes. So, while most mainstream neuroscientists remain skeptical, there's been a steady stream of experiments and ideas stemming from OrchOR theory. In the lab, researchers have tested whether if microtubules can support quantum effects. Some studies indeed claim to see some quantum-like behaviors in microtubules, though the results are still hotly debated and far from definitive. And beyond the lab, OrchOR theory has inspired a handful of tech startups. Take Nirvanic Consciousness Technologies, where they're trying to engineer AI that draws directly on quantum principles. And this would create artificial intelligence that's not just smart, but potentially conscious. Other research groups, like the Qualia Research Institute, are exploring the mathematical structure of consciousness, often referencing quantum ideas, even if they do not fully adopt the OrchOR theory. And even scientific conferences, like the Science of Consciousness meeting, which includes sessions debating the quantum mind theories. So OrchOR theory is fueling research and innovation, even though it is on the fringe of science. So with all the skepticism, why does OrchOR theory still come up? Why do people, even scientists, still care? And the answer is simple, because consciousness is still one of the major questions that remains unanswered. Mainstream theories can describe brain activity, but they still cannot explain why something feels on the inside. And OrchOR theory stands out because it dares to ask if the answer might lie in the very foundations of reality itself, where physics, biology, and philosophy collide. For some, OrchOR theory is compelling because it pushes us to rethink the nature of mind, matter, and what it means to be alive. For others, it is a reminder that science hasn't closed the book on consciousness. And sometimes radical ideas are what move the field forward, even if they might turn out to be wrong. And for everyone, OrchOR theory is a perfect example of how far we'll go to try and explain the answer to the question, what are we really? So, what do I think as a neuroscientist? Honestly, I love that the OrchOR theory challenges us to look beyond the obvious, even if I'm not convinced about the evidence yet. However, I'm also not a physicist. The truth is that most of the biggest strides in science are made by wild ideas and not just repeating what is safe. Whether quantum physics is the answer or not to our consciousness, I think theories like the Orch OR theory remind us just how much we do not understand about our minds and those of others. Sometimes I wonder, we know that people can have genetic mutations and a property of their body is missing, and often this leads to a disease. So I truly wonder if it is truly a mechanical thing that gives rise to consciousness. I also wonder, is there a possibility that there are humans who are not conscious? Yeah, food for thought. Don't quote me on this, seriously, I'm just throwing ideas here, but yeah. That would for sure explain some people in our lives, right? But anyway, so now I want to know what you think. Do you buy the idea that consciousness is a quantum phenomenon? If you're intrigued by the idea that quantum processes are giving rise to consciousness, it raises a bigger question in this day and age of AI. Because if we still have no idea how consciousness arises in humans, we for sure have no idea how to recognize it in others. So here's the question. If we built a conscious AI, would we even recognize it as conscious if it didn't work like us? And if this is the question that you would like to explore, well, actually I dig exactly into this problem in this video over here. And with this, thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Ciao!